Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince and I will have the final part of our discussion about observations from admissions decisions this year. Susan and I will discuss a speak pipe question from a listener who is asking for advice for her student who is content getting B's in high school. For our interview, we have a brand new 4-part interview. It's with Nate Haveman, the VP of Enrollment at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And you get a second spotlight this week. It's with Kevin Newton, and we are discussing changes he is observing in international admissions. And it is part 1 of 2. Friends, on Monday episode, I said you would hear from Peg Keogh, the Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro, discussing missed opportunities on the FAFSA and the CSS profile. But the Kevin Newton content is very time sensitive, and I didn't want you to miss the time window he talks about. And besides that, most seniors are done with the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and most juniors are not really thinking about it yet. So we will air that interview on the CSS profile and the FAFSA in a few months, a little closer to when junior parents really start focusing on financial aid.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Friends, it's time for the third and final part of my conversation with Vince Garcia, one of our co-hosts, on changes we observed this year in the admissions office. So here's a question for you, Vince.
Yes.
I know in our company, we saw less Ivy League EDs this year, and people like those kinds of kids that wanted to look at the most selective schools, they were shifting to places like Duke and Vanderbilt and Northwestern, Georgetown, Rice.
Yep.
Places like that. I saw it was very clearly pronounced. I mean, our numbers, I don't know to get into numbers, but I know within our company we had 5 EDs to Northwestern, 5 to Duke, and maybe 1 to Penn. I don't think we had a single one to Columbia this year.
Wow.
I mean, we did have a bunch to Cornell. I think we had 4 to Cornell this year. 1 to Dartmouth. But those are all places that would normally have at least as many or more. Penn, Columbia, Princeton, Harvard, Yale. Those were places people would do their single choice early action. Now they're like, I don't want to do it. Did you? Brown was not, just the numbers are down for us in those schools and up for other schools.
Yes.
Do you experience that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Cornell probably was the top Ivy, and then it would be Northwestern, adjacent.
Yeah.
And then Duke, but no one to Columbia. Not even like oh no, my parents won't allow me to apply there. Penn, a lot of disinterest. I saw students look at Rice, where it was so hard to talk about it before. Like I was saying, okay, we're going to take a trip to Mars, but now people, because if you go to Rice and you visit, you realize, oh, this is what Stanford should look like. Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful. It's so stunning. It's really a spectacular. The residential college program there is spectacular.
Yeah, they got that thing going on, similar to Yale. They got a nice little program there.
I feel like kids are really tied to one another. They love their experience there. Every LA student I've ever sent to Rice has never transferred or regretted it. So I think so I'm seeing this huge, really significant shift away from the schools you mentioned. Even Harvard was
Yeah. No,
a
I agree. And if
little
you look at
chilly.
those applications, they came out like Yale was down, Brown was down, Dartmouth was down almost 11%. You know, they were down. Still had a lot of interest in the Midwest, especially Michigan, Wisconsin.
Yes.
Those two schools continue to have a lot of interest. I'm seeing a lot more interest in IU Kelly than I've seen before. You know, I've seen more interest in that program. They did some really cool things, and I got a chance to meet with one of their leaders at NACAC in LA.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah, because they when you apply to Kelly before, you either get in direct at mid, it's just by the numbers, or you can do review request. If you don't have the SAT or the GPA, you can do review request, which is an appeal program. And a lot of kids have done that appeal and won. But now they've added a third one. It was really smart. Now you can come in pre-business and you have to take 6 business classes and 30 credit hours. And if you have a B average without any C's in core classes, like you're automatically in. So they provided a third way. So, because, they have 2,100 kids and it's a really huge business school. Compare that to Wisconsin's like less than a third of that. So I noticed a big surge in IU, some of those big state schools. And then are you also seeing interest in general more in Southern schools? Do you see that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, talk to us because I know Julia's seen it up there. Places people would never in the past weren't looking at schools like Clemson and South Carolina, Tennessee. Now they are.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing on your end?
So this spring break, they're from now till the end of April, spring break. I've sent more people south than the last 20 years combined. Like almost every junior has a Southern school on their list.
You sound like me. I said on the podcast a few years ago, I said I had more applicants to Clemson the last 2 years than the previous 20. Yeah. And you know what schools I really think are taken off? They're going to are TCU, SMU.
Oh yeah.
Because you still get that private school, smaller, mid-size, really good business programs. You get a gorgeous campus, friendly students, and a decent chance at merit scholarship money. Strong pre-med. You get the school spirit of being in a major sports conference, and you get to be in a major city. I mean, Dallas obviously is in Fort Worth. You're in major cities. So people like that can fly in. They can get direct flights right in. I've got great visits set up, Texas coming up here for 3 weeks, doing the whole 3-week Texas tour. Just like I did the California tour, I got the Texas tour. I'm there from the 9th to the 1st. And so I'm excited to really sit down and sit with a lot of students, admission leaders. It's been a while since I've been back there. But I think those two, they haven't quite blown up yet to the extent that are, but I see all the writing on the wall. Like, people are moving to that area. What is your theory on the interest in the South? Or also moving away from, the sort of, for lack of a better word, fixation on Ivies?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for my clients there were sort of 3 things running through. One is sort of a weariness about DEI or what parents and families perceived as being DEI.
Especially Columbia.
Yeah.
Columbia was like the poster child for that, I feel.
Yeah.
For some people, Harvard too. Some people put Harvard, like, I feel when people said that to me, they were talking Harvard, Columbia, Harvard, and a little bit of Penn.
Yes.
Those are the places. Like Cornell, because it's more remote. It's not in an urban location. Yeah. I never had people say that to me about Cornell or Princeton or Dartmouth.
No.
But I did hear it a lot about Columbia, Penn, and Harvard, those 3.
And that's where you're going to also see a rise, is Dartmouth is going to continue to rise like a phoenix. But I think Michigan was in there a little bit too with what was going on there. So that was one thing. And then after October 7th, and it sort of polarized the issue of what's happening in the Middle East and with Israel and Palestine.
So here's a question. UCLA was kind of a hotbed for Palestinian protesting, but I never had anybody say, "Oh, I'm not looking at UCLA because of the protests," like they
I had
do. Do you
Jewish
think it
families.
was
I
just the
did.
publicity? Like I know there was a lot in Congress, like the Harvard's president Penn, they got fired. There was a lot of, was it? You think it was just the high level publicity that those schools got with all of that?
High level publicity, plus that particular, I think, UC president retired. So, they attached, that the drama from last spring onto that person. But also, there's a weird bifurcation that happens. I definitely have Jewish families that feel uncomfortable about Berkeley, and to a certain extent. And I'm surprised that UCLA doesn't have the same sort of cirrus that Berkeley
Yeah,
generates.
Berkeley definitely gets it. Berkeley definitely gets, tarred and feathered as too woke activist.
Yes, yes.
Because I haven't had a family that's super progressive. And the mom said to me, that place is too progressive. Because what happened was when they visited, the protests were so loud, it was like distracting. And so, like, this is somebody who's very progressive. And like, this place is too progressive to me because they felt like I'm support some of this stuff, but like, I want my kid to learn. And
Right,
they
right,
just thought it was rude. It was so loud that it was like it should hurt, like was impeding education.
right. And you don't want to block people from being able to get to class. But that was happening at UCLA
That
more than it
all
was
of
at
that.
Berkeley.
Yeah, but UCLA doesn't seem to be tarred and feathered with it the same way.
Because I think when you look at Berkeley and you look at UCLA, one looks like kind of an encampment and the other has no sign of that. The other
Yeah.
thing that I saw, and this is why the UC still hold the value, and I still believe that I have families that will send, even though they're leery about Berkeley, they would be willing to send them there, is that the price.
Hmm.
So when you look at UCLA and Berkeley and you're talking about an admit rate, Berkeley might hit 10% this year. UCLA could go down to 8%. The value and what you're paying for is so strong. I feel like families feel like they can sort of move around all the Michigas, where I think at those other places they wondered if the people running the show knew how to handle all the chaos.
And of course, if you're talking in state and you're talking 40 grand instead of 100 grand, I
Yes,
mean, the UCs are still expensive out of state schools as far as publics go.
yes, yes. And even that's to me, if you're paying between 42 and 45, that's a lot, and that's in state.
I know it is a lot. Well, the housing costs are so high, just the meals and housing alone.
Hmm, hmm. But you'll see the rise of the South. The one thing that, when you scratch beneath the surface, one conversation that I'm having with a family where they have a junior and they have a sophomore, and they've started to drift over towards the South. When they check out the opportunities for Jewish life,
I know.
it's not great. Like,
No, I'm giving the percentages a lot of times to my families, and you know how this is. Different people are very different that way as far as how much they want that critical mass, how actively they want the Hillel. Like it is a full spectrum of Jewish families. There's the ones where they practice all of the holy days and everything, and like I'm apologizing sometimes because I forget that I didn't realize to contact them at the wrong time or whatever. And then there's others that are like their J in Jewish is just a lot smaller. And if Clemson, South Carolina, and UTK and these schools are under 2%, they're still okay with it. And then there's others that just right away, no way, it's too small percentage. You
well,
know?
for one family I saw, because there is a significant Jewish population at SMU, but for this one family,
Yes.
because they ate kosher and the only way you could get a kosher meal was out of a machine, that was a deal breaker for the family.
Hmm.
But I think that SMU will change that within the next 2 years for sure.
You know, it's interesting. Tulane gets such mixed reviews from my Jewish families because, you know, it's 37% Jewish. It's like higher than Brandeis.
Yes.
And some people like it. And then others think it's too New Orleans party. And they think it's not a serious, they don't feel the academics are serious. They feel like it's such a, you know, the culture of New Orleans they just feel like it's too much of a party scene. It's very interesting how my Jewish families react to Tulane.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still holds a lot of value here for sure.
Oh, Tulane does?
Yeah, yeah. That I haven't seen a slowdown. The issue there is just gender.
Oh, yeah. It's so skewed, women to guy. So
Yeah.
skewed. And then, of course, they're, you know, they're very, very sharp elbows in terms of wanting to admit people are going to come.
Oh, yeah.
Either the level of engagement they want or the ED commitment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's crazy. Yeah, I think the South, I think a lot of it, some of it is weather, some of it is cost, some of it is escaping the rat race of why are we fighting all over these single digit admit rate stuff. But I think a lot of it is sports and fun too. You're seeing all these teams on national TV and it just looks fun. I can go down there and I can have that with my good weather.
Yes.
And it's a financial value.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some families for whom they like that it's not as politically liberal. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Vince, this has been great as always. Love talking shop with you. And
We'll
I know
talk soon.
We got another recording coming up soon. Excited to have you back on the saddle and glad you're fully mending. I appreciate you, my friend.
All right. Take care. Have a great day.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Susan, we have a question from an anonymous mom in Northern Virginia. I'm going to play the question and get your thoughts.
Hi, I'm a listener in Northern Virginia. I've been listening for 3 years and don't miss an episode. Your advice helped us navigate the college admissions process with our oldest son, who is now a happy freshman in college. Please know I am so appreciative for all that you share on every episode that helps families like ours. And I think that it would have been a much bumpier process with our first son if it weren't for your podcast. So thank you. We have 3 more children, and my question today is related to our second child who's in 11th grade. Currently, we're having a hard time making a college list for our 11th grader. As you know, Northern Virginia can be a pressure cooker with many high-achieving high school students. Our first son was very academic, very focused on college admissions, competitive. He had a high GPA, a high SAT score, and lots of leadership, volunteering, sports, etc. He was also, I will note, in a private high school where his school's college counselor, each college counselor only had between 40 and 50 students that they were managing. Our second son is in 11th grade, and we're in a very different situation. First of all, he's in a public high school, a great public high school, but just a different setup in terms of college counseling. He is a very smart kid and does take some AP classes, but he is a solid B student and very content with getting Bs. He is an artistic kid. He's enrolled in a music technology program that our public school district offers through an academy. He has an average SAT score, but is content with that, doesn't really want to take it again. He is not in many extracurriculars and doesn't have a leadership position yet. I will say our oldest son was kind of a stressed out high schooler and very high achieving, but with that comes a lot of stress. Our second son is actually happier navigating high school. We have not pressured him to be something he isn't. And it has been kind of nice to have a less stressed out and laid back high school student. He works hard. He's a great son and brother, and he is confident in who he is, comfortable in his own skin. And he does want to go to college. At the same time, we live in Northern Virginia. We know college admissions are tough, and that includes our state schools. And we're having a hard time creating his college list. I would love any tips, any advice, any perspective that you might offer for a family like us. We're applying the same tactics to helping our second son create his college list, the same tactics we used with our oldest, but we're coming up with way fewer schools and feel way less equipped this time. So would love any wisdom, any advice that you could share. Thank you so much.
What do you think?
Boy, my heart is with this mom, and I have so much admiration for her insights into both of her children, and I realize she's got 4 in total. And this is a real case study that she's giving us on how wonderfully different and differently gifted our children are. And you and I, Mark, have worked in schools for a long time, and we see that. I remember one of my last years in my school, I worked with the 5th child in a family. I had never had I'd had a couple 4s. I'd been there long enough.
You sound just like me. I had several 4s and I got my first 5th and I was really excited. It's the first, and this family has 7. So I said, so maybe they'll shatter the record, but yeah.
Wow. Well, and it's easy for us on the outside to see children as unique and different. And Quakers have the saying that there's that of God in everyone, and that we in our school carried that forward to mean that as educators, our job was to help identify the wonderfulness, the gifts in every student, and bring out those gifts. It's harder at home in a way because you're living with them, but how wonderful of this mom to be so clear in her observations, but also letting her children be who they are, and not say, well, your older sibling did it this way, and yes, he drove us crazy, but things worked out. So
The other thing she said, and I agree with everything you said, that I really appreciate it. She said, in some ways, this 11th grader, he goes through life in a more stress-free way.
Yep.
Because of his approach.
That's right.
It's not going to kill him if he gets a B. He's okay with it. One thing I liked about it is I feel like we're always giving all the plaudits to the high achiever. They're always the one that gets stroked, in some ways, we almost can maybe tacitly encourage neurotic behavior by what we reward. And
very true.
It was just nice to see the strengths of the 11th grader being extolled and him being appreciated for who he is.
Absolutely. And you know what? The bottom line, Mark, is that a B average student is pretty strong.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to lose sight of that a student who earns, a solid B record in a college preparatory program is really strong. We just tend to over focus on the other types of kids that are out there, fighting for the perfect grades and GPA. And as we've learned,
saying that, Susan, you can't say that enough, right? Like,
yeah,
the average acceptance rate is 73%. That's right now. That's up about 10% in the last 10 years. So 3/4 of kids are getting in college. Most colleges are really happy to have a B student who's a good kid.
That's right.
And we can't say that enough, because you'll hear this when you work with a student. And I'm talking about students that have, very, very stellar transcripts. And they'll get in maybe an early action school, maybe a rolling admission school, maybe a direct admit school. And they'll be like, whew, pressure's off. At least I'm going to college. And then, your first initial thought, it can be this reflexively when you do this work, is, why would you be surprised that you're going to college? Because we're in this world and we see that kids get it. But if you look at it from their perspective, you can understand how they feel that way, because if you're reading all the articles about what gets all the ink, it's always on hardest year ever to get in, this, that, the other. Doesn't get a lot of publicity to talk about how most schools are really happy to have a B student who's a good kid. I mean, they'll love that. In fact, it's one thing that I've been thinking about talking to all of our co-hosts about, but I had a conversation with a pretty reputable school, and it was a leader there, and he said to me, "Where are you sending your B plus kids? That's what I want to know." And I hadn't ever really been asked that way by a senior admissions person. Just, of course, it depends on the kid. There's, I mean, we could go on and on and on. But I mean, this was a fairly selective school, and he's like, "We're happy to take good, solid B plus students." Well, that was a school that's more selective than most. There are plenty that are really happy to have the B student, and I don't think we can say that enough.
I think the warning there is the major.
Of course.
Because I could say that about all three institutions that I've read applications for, that there are just some fields of study. If a college cares, right, and not all liberal arts colleges care that much, but it's a research question for a family to look at very carefully, whether, how much in the application process are you being evaluated, for your major, which is the international tradition, right?
Sure.
International universities. We heard that in our meeting last night when we were talking college counselors with some UK and Oceania universities. It's all about the major and your preparation for it. Now, it's not quite as rigid in the United States. There's still lots of portals into universities where the student is identifying that they are exploratory. Think of all the great universities, even places like Northeastern, which is, as we think of that as being pretty hyper-focused on your field of study because of the co-op program. But they have a fabulous exploratory program where you can go in and say, I need 2 or 3 semesters and I need good advising. I need help taking a breadth of courses in areas that I think interest me. That's kind of an old-fashioned model. I mean, that's the way it was when I went to college, for sure. I don't remember anybody really knowing, or at least it wasn't talked about that much. But now, kids are, psychologists call it identity foreclosure, where they're deciding prematurely and without sufficient evidence on a label that helps them feel and appear a certain way. It's just so not cool to say to your parents, friends or your neighbors, I have no idea what I want to study, but we're going to be spending, tens of thousands of dollars a year to send me off to this great school for me to figure it out. It's more acceptable to say, I'm interested in biochemistry and becoming a neuroscientist, or, the problem is the colleges are onto that. And if you're applying to something, you got to have the preparation, the academic preparation, and you've got to show that you know what you're talking about, right? I can't tell you how many, kind of psychology students, applicants who put psychology as their first choice major this year, which is kind of the grab bag liberal arts major. Sounds interesting. Probably haven't taken a class in it in high school, or maybe a few people have. But it sounds, I like people like me. And
I'm laughing, Susan, because
why?
I was a psychology major.
Me too.
So this hasn't changed in 40 years. Like that's how I thought. I remember exactly how I thought in high school. I like people. People are fascinating. It'd be cool to learn more about people. Psychology seems perfect.
Well, I was an undergrad psych major, but I didn't make that decision until second semester of my sophomore year. I thought I was going to be bioscience because that was my favorite. Those were my favorite classes and teachers in high school. But psychology, I found out after taking 2 or 3 classes at the college level, was a science. My angle was animals and research, experimental work. I was not the other kind of psych major that wanted to help people. I really didn't care that much. So ironically, here I am,
Here you are helping people.
Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. But, you can't, our mom here, we don't know what her second son is interested in. He's in a music technology program in high school, which sounds very cool, very cool. And there are some great colleges that have music business, music technology programs, so that's always a possibility. But he may really be undecided and benefit from a place where he doesn't declare his major until the end of his sophomore year, or can enter through an exploratory portal and really have a couple of semesters of guided exploration, which I think may be a wonderful opportunity for him.
Do you have any thoughts on him being more laid back? He's content getting, not getting decent grades, but not top grades. He's okay with that. Does that speak at all to any cultural things about a school that may be a fit or not a fit for him?
Well, for sure.
Why don't you share what comes to mind about that?
Well, when I work with a student like that, Mark, who identifies for me early on that they are not a highly competitive, meaning they want to set their own standards.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be competing against their classmates in a way, colleges that grade on a curve where your classmates set what you eventually will earn as a grade, where you want to be dealt with as an individual, valued as that individual. You have to maybe get a copy of the FISC guide and the college transitions guide, which are two of my, college transitions guidebook is called College is Worth the Money, I think.
College is worth your money. Yeah.
Worth your money. And then the FISC guide, which is, I think, one of the better qualitative portrayals of college campuses. And you look specifically for schools that are not no pain, no gain, right?
The only thing I would say with that, though, Susan, we love FISC. I think FISC does such a great job of describing what the experience is like to be at a place. Like, and I'm sure you
Right.
you agree with this. When you and I know a school very, very well, and we read FISC, we generally feel like they get it. You can tell they've spent a lot of time there. But here's the only caveat I like to have. 2,275 four-year accredited bachelor granting not-for-profit schools in this country, and FISC is only taking one of 7 and putting them
Right.
in their book. And I get it. Like to do that amount of research that they're doing, you can't really do that for like all 2,275 schools. So the only thing I don't like is occasionally somebody will use FISC or same for Princeton's Best 390 and say, it's not in there. How can it be any good?
Well, that's a very good point.
And especially, FISC and Princeton Review, they both do a good job of trying to have a diversity of types of schools, but they are going to tend to have a lot of those spots are going to be taken up by schools taking the B+ kid and higher. And so some of the diamonds in the rough that want the B student won't necessarily be in FISC. So I just wouldn't want someone to think,
no, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's just the only thing I like to add.
That's a good point. So how else can a family suss out the environment, the learning environment? I mean, you obviously need to talk to people,
Sure.
Try and connect with students who are there or recent alumni, say to your admissions counselor, your territory manager, I really, do you have any tour guides that I could talk to who are kind of started off like me? It is hard to get because the websites are pretty commercial. If you do drill down and read the mission and value statement and the strategic plan, you will get a sense of who that university believes it's called to serve. What is its population of people it wants to serve, and how is it going to deliver that education? So sometimes that'll help a little bit. You have to read those, and kind of sort through them.
One thing I like to have my students do is, and I'll give you a little bit of background on this. I was working with a mom from the Denver area 4 years ago, and she scheduled a meeting to talk about a particular college she thought potentially could be a match for her student. And she was saying, I'm really conflicted about this school because on the one hand, I see these as the positives, and she rattled off about 6 of them. And then she said, on the other hand, I'm kind of concerned about some of these things over here. And she said 4 or 5. And I knew this school very well. And I couldn't believe that she had this type of prescient insight into the school.
Huh.
So I really was really like flummoxed, because like she was, to me, I almost would have thought someone would have almost had to work there to be that insightful. So I said to her, your description is spot on from my experience. Where did you get this knowledge? So between the reviews on Niche and the reviews on Unigo, you can read about 300 reviews on a school. Now, these are short, but what I tell people to do is pay attention to the things that keep coming up over and over and over.
Good point.
Over and over and over again. And someone thinks 300 reviews. Are you kidding me? I mean, these are like paragraph, right? They're short. These are like 4 sentences, 4 sentences. It's an exercise that's worth doing. It's kind of what we were talking about in another podcast recently, Susan, when talking about Rate My Professors. When you see a significant number and you see things that get repeated over and over and over again, I'll tell you another example of this. So I'm working with a student this year that won the Richmond Scholars. That's their full cost of attendance. And, in order to get that, it's just an extraordinary student. So the student has a number of like incredibly appealing choices. The dad's, to me, I'm a little bit concerned about some of the things I'm reading about fraternities. Now, I like Richmond a lot. You like Richmond. We send a lot of kids there. But this has been the biggest complaint that I've had from my students that have gone to Richmond, is that, there's a group of elite fraternities, like really, really financially elite, flying in with private planes. I'm not saying everybody does that, but there is a culture there. And it has been concerning to some students at the school that felt like it's bifurcated the community, that walk by you, don't speak. Like, I don't want to stereotype everybody, but I'd say that's been the single biggest complaint that I've had from my Richmond students, is they haven't always been happy with some of the behavior from some of the people in the fraternity sorority. So, and it's a school that I love, so I'm hoping I'm not besmirching this school. I recommend it a lot. Think very highly of it. My families have had great experiences there, and I still think it's one of the real underrated gems. But that has been the biggest complaint. Like when I talk to them and I sit down, and especially if they are not very well resourced, because they tend to feel it more.
Right.
They feel that effect of the money. So I just bring it up as it's an exercise that's worth doing. Nothing is gospel. But I like to say, really pay attention to things you're reading 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, on the positive or the concern. Because, I'm big on going to campuses, talking to 10 to 20 people, but realistically, how many times can people actually do that, given the constraint of resources? So there has to be a way to get at culture besides going to the place and spending 3.5 hours on the campus. I do recommend people do that when they're down to their final choices, right? I think it's enough to do that. But when you're in that initial stage and you're screening 20 to 30 schools, and another thing, and Susan, we talk about this all the time, but one thing I've learned being on this podcast is there is great value to repetition. Boy, those school newspapers are helpful.
Absolutely.
Because you will see culture. You will see culture there, and you'll see the hot topics on campus. And because they're not written with perspectives in mind, they'll drop the guard.
Yep.
You'll read. In fact, was a podcast listener 6 years ago. He reached out and he thanked us for emphasizing school newspapers, because it led them to utilize that for all of the schools that they were serious about. And in one school in particular, I'm not going to mention the school, they were reading about what they considered to be a very disturbing rape allegation on a campus that had gotten a lot of controversy. And it's a very, very prestigious school, very prestigious school. So this is, a strong student. So he was looking at those kinds of schools. But so they decided they were going to take a visit there anyway. And on the visit, they asked a couple different people in leadership about the incident that they were not happy at all with the answer that they got. So
Oh,
they took the school off the list. But the reason I brought that story up is school newspaper, like you're never going to get a flyer in your mailbox or an email that's going to talk about a bad hazing incident or a fraternity that shut down or this, that, the other, the date rape problem they have. And it's not all negative. They'll say business school got largest gift in school history.
oh, sure.
But that's some of the most authentic communication that people can get, because it was never intended to be for perspectives. But as a perspective, you get to sit in and be the fly on the wall and hear what are they actually talking about? What are the things students care about? What are the hot issues on campus? And you just get a great insight into school culture.
And even look at who are the guest speakers that are being brought to the campus. You know, that the newspaper will report on that.
Yes.
And how are kids feeling about who they're allowed to spend their student activities budget on in terms of speakers, and how much control is, you know, being exerted over that? And do they hear the kind of the multiplicity of voices being represented? I mean, this is a hard time right now for the whole campus speaker event, but you know, between the op-ed and the editorials and the report on who's coming to campus and what the students think about that, it's extraordinary. The other thing that, you know, I've had some students do that was helpful is they've asked their school counselor or even teachers at their high school if they know who in recent years has gone to certain colleges from the high school. You know, like if someone recommends, you know, Virginia Commonwealth to you and you don't know much about it, but you'd love to talk to somebody who goes there, you know, see if you can, you know, use LinkedIn or go to the website. Sometimes you can kind of find people on the website, but ask your high school if they can help you get connected to some kids.
Yeah, you know how I've utilized that a lot, Susan. A lot of times, you know, a family I'm working with, they'll say, we're going to be in this area and we'd really love to visit this school, and there's no availability at all. Nothing's booked, nothing's available.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, why don't you try to network through your school counselor or through other people in last year's class, whatever, find somebody who's there and see if they would be willing to either walk you around or grab a coffee with you. And
you don't have to have known them.
Yes, you don't have to have known them.
It's absolutely.
And then the thing is, a lot of times, you know, it goes further than that. So once people get that one person networks them into other people. So I'm going to shout out somebody, Hillary's daughter, who is at Wellesley. Well, she has one student at Wellesley, one at Colorado College. But, you know, I was able to connect somebody who's going to Wellesley next year with Hillary's daughter.
Oh, wonderful.
And they really connected and hit it off. Well, Hillary's daughter's graduating. So she's like, I hate that I'm not going to be here when she comes, but I connected her with somebody in her major. And I find you can do that. Once you get one person, they can tap you into other people. And you can kind of, you know, if you want a couple of voices, it's a good way to do it. And another thing is sometimes even the tour guides, if you do go to a place, sometimes they give their business cards out and you can follow up with them, or you can.
That's right.
Do you know of a student who's interested in this? Anybody that you can connect me with?
And, you know, sometimes you can go onto the website. Like I did this with a student this year who was interested in riding competitively at a particular school. We went to the college's website. We looked at in the athletic department at the riding programs information, and they gave the name of and the email contact for a couple of the students who were officers of the Student Riding Association, which is unusual. You can't always find email addresses on the website, but there they were. And I said, you know, reach out and introduce yourself and say, hey, I found your contact information on the website. We share this interest. I would love to talk to you about the program and your experience, get a little more intel beyond what's published. And college students are very flattered, you know, when you show interest in them. And for a high school student,
So are professors. The same
Right.
thing. That's the best way to get in front of
That's
a
right.
professor is to say, I've been reading about these courses that you've taught.
About your research.
Yeah, your research. And I think I would love to, to take your courses, and I'm going to be on campus. Blah, blah, blah. Is there any chance, that's it's not guaranteed to work, but that's a great way to do it. The other thing I've really done with this, Susan, with my students is student clubs.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the clubs on the website, find the ones that are interesting to you. And then some of them have their own Instagram pages.
That's right.
Which
That's right.
can be very helpful. But get a contact, reach out, like you said, express your interest. And now you're into the network kind of like they'll introduce you to others oftentimes. They can meet you if you're visiting, or if you can't visit because of either time or money, you can communicate. Nowadays kids are so big on social, even if you don't talk on the phone, they can just communicate back and forth. So these are ways that you get to know the culture. You got to get beyond the marketing to figure out what works for you.
The last piece of advice I would give our Northern Virginia mom is, your second child's list doesn't have to be big. I mean, I think a lot of families, especially with very high achievers, because of the selectivity, the difficulty of getting admitted, blow up their lists and apply to, a huge number of schools because they feel like the odds are against them, which probably in reality is correct. But for a solid B student, this student is going to be admitted so many places. This is going to be a solid B student is going to be a contender all over the place, right? We kind of started off by saying that.
Yeah, as long as they apply well. Yeah.
As long as they apply well and they're not applying to schools that are, in that, below 20%. But I don't know. We don't know this student well enough to judge that. But the list doesn't, in the end, have to be enormous like it does for, maybe that first son who's aiming really high. And, then the second thing I would say is really look for colleges that welcome and think positively about undecided kids.
Yeah, I love that advice. I'm going to close out by playing a SpeakPipe message that a listener sent in. I've been wanting to play this message for a while, and you've given me a perfect segue. So I don't even remember who I did this with, Susan. It might have been you. I can't remember which one of our co-hosts. I think it might have been Lisa. Now I think about it. A listener basically sent in a message and said, in effect, everybody has these crazy long lists. Something wrong with me? Because we're thinking about applying to like a half a dozen. And we gave them the permission structure to do that in that question. Well, this listener called back to give feedback on the results of how things worked out now that they're in retrospect and they're looking back through the rearview mirror. And so I've kind of wanted to play that because I thought it might be helpful to people. And I think this is a perfect segue to play that. So the next voice you'll hear is a question from a listener, or response from a listener, following up on how it worked out having a shorter list.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Hello, YCBK team. I just wanted to call with an update and a thank you. Earlier this fall, I called regarding my current senior and her more narrow college application list than some of her classmates were creating. It made me nervous, and I was seeking your reassurance that it would be okay to not apply in the high double digits for a number of universities. I'm happy to report she applied to 6 schools, was admitted to 6 schools, and now has wonderful options to choose from going forward to continue her education. Thanks for all the help. We greatly appreciate it.
And thanks to the generosity of the Princeton Review for sending in that SpeakPipe question, you are going to get your choice of one of the following 4 books: College Admissions 101, Essays That Kicked Apps, The Best 390 Colleges, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to send me an email at mark@schoolmatch4u.com. Put Princeton Book Giveaway in the subject line. And in the body of the email, put the title of the book you want and put the episode number where we discussed your question, and just share a brief description of the question that you asked.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, over the next 4 weeks, you're going to hear my interview with Nate Haveman, the VP of Enrollment at Hope College. And in part 1, Nate gives his backstory. Nate explains how Hope is different from other colleges. Nate talks about how attending Hope impacted him as a student. Nate tells us what the tradition of the pull is at Hope and why it was so fun for him. Nate tells us how big Hope is. Nate tells us more about Holland, Michigan. Nate tells us about a very exciting new initiative known as Hope Forward. Listen and enjoy. Friends, you're in for a treat today. I'm here with Nate Haveman, and he is the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Hope College. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Nate.
Hey, thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've got some fans out there. You know, this whole interview was orchestrated by one of our listeners who's been asking me for over a year to have you on. And I said, make it happen. Make it happen. Yeah.
Let me at him. I'm ready.
Well, then I announced it, and another one of our listeners got super jazzed because it's kind of like the family school.
Yeah.
Right? And so I actually worked with her on some of the questions set for the interview. I'm like, well, you know it really well. Your family set knows it. So what should I ask Nate? So this is a combination of my thoughts, her thoughts.
Okay. Well, that's perfect. Yeah. Give me whatever you got.
Awesome. So why don't you start out with your backstory? Say anything you want to say. Certainly walk us up to what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I don't know how far you want me to go, how deep, but I grew up in the area. Hope is in Holland, Michigan. So it's 5 miles from Lake Michigan, just up the coast, 2 hours from Chicago. I grew up in a small town called Fremont, and that's incidentally, Mark, that is the Gerber baby food capital of the world.
Cool.
So
that's
fun
cool.
one there.
Everybody knows Gerber.
Everyone knows Gerber. So I grew up in Fremont, and then I did come to Hope as a student from 98 to 2002. And then I'll be brief on this next section, but then my wife and I moved from Holland to New Mexico, out to Gallup, which is just short of Arizona, just all the way west in New Mexico, and lived there for 13 years. 2 of those years I was a teacher, 6th grade at a small Christian school called Rehoboth. And then for 11 years I ran my own business, a publishing business called the Gallup Journey magazine, and learned how to be an entrepreneur. While I was out there. And then 2015, we moved back to the area. I started working in the admissions office at Hope, and then slowly worked my way up to the role that I am now inhabiting.
So what are the different roles you've had within the admission office?
Yeah, I started I started as a rep in 2015. So I had a pretty large territory, both local and regional schools. Local and regional state high schools. So I had like the states of Iowa, Missouri, but most of my territory was local to the area, probably 60 miles kind of looking there, and led a team of folks for 3 or 4 years. And then right after COVID, was asked by President Scogan, who I hope we'll talk about later, to lead the team on an interim basis. That was 21. That was right after COVID. And I said, yeah, I'll do that for a year, but I don't know that that's my calling. I don't know that this is where I'm supposed to be, but I'd love to do it for a year and see what happens. And he said, well, if you're doing it, you got to do it for 2 years. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. And then, he got me to commit, and man, I've loved it. It's certainly not without its challenges, but I love Hope. That will come out in this podcast. That will come out. And I don't know that I would do this role. I don't know if I would do this role anywhere else. But I really love what I'm doing now.
Do you feel you're able to use your entrepreneurial background and orientation and a lot of the creativity and the programming and approach you use to things?
That is a very good question. Yes, I do. I feel like that comes out a lot. You've been in the higher ed space before, so you know this. Sometimes it moves at a glacial pace. Change moves very, very slowly. And when you're in admissions, you don't have that luxury. You're constantly on the front foot and trying to be innovative with students and how they're either they are responding or are not responding to outreach. And so, yeah, I think there's the piece of the entrepreneurial that I've been able to hold on to a little bit of just like how decisive can we be in the space that we're in, and how risk aware can we be in the space we're in when so much of higher ed is from my point of view fairly risk averse.
Sure.
How do we walk that line of figuring out what's next and how to meet students where they are?
Great. Well, we're going to talk today about understanding hope. And let's say you happen to be all the way the other side of the country, Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're taking an Uber. The Uber driver says to you, "I've never heard of Hope, Nate. How is Hope different from the several thousand other colleges that are out there?" How would you answer that?
Yeah, I've had that question. Maybe not in Albuquerque, but I've had that question many times.
By an Uber driver?
Maybe. I mean, there's 5,000 colleges in the country, and so yeah. I mean, how does Hope stand out? I think it's if you've never heard of it or you've never visited, it's tougher to understand it, and I don't love that. I wish it was easier, but for me, some of the hallmarks of Hope are certainly its location. That'll come out a few different times. I mentioned Holland already and being close to the lake in a very picturesque downtown. But for me, it's sort of this this combination of really rigorous and strong academics, which I know a lot of schools can also grab, coupled with a really vibrant faith community. I think those two things, finding those two things in one package is not found around every street corner. I think it's pretty unique what we can do to be ranked so highly in like the U.S. News or something like that, and then also to have such a strong and vibrant faith community. So I would, if I was in an Uber, Mark, and I'm driving, I got 15 minutes or 10 minutes, I'd probably talk about both of those things, and I'd talk about the feeling that students have and that they tell us about when they visit campus for the first time. That kind of both the head part of this decision for a family, some of the rankings, and do we have the right major and those types of things, and then also the heart of when you walk around campus and you're talking to students and professors and staff. What does that make you feel like? I'd probably talk about both of those if I could fit it all in one Uber ride.
So let's take you back to your time as a student. I'm sure you've had a chance to reflect on how Hope impacted you as a student.
So I have thought about that more in the last 8 years since I've been back, or 9 years since that I've been back in the area. I've thought about that so much because we have so many students and families every year deciding to come or not to come to Hope. And so I've really been thinking about what was my experience like. I don't remember it, honestly. I don't remember the prospective student journey very much, like going to visit schools or anything like that. I'm the youngest. Where do you fall in the birth order?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. Oh, so much tougher. The oldest is the trailblazer.
Yeah, I think it's easier. The youngest says, "Oh, it's getting compared."
Oh, that's true too. And I had that. So I, both of my sisters went to college, and so I had visited them at their colleges. My oldest sister, Becky, went to Michigan State, which is a couple hours down the road, and then my middle sister, Rachel, went to Hope. And so I had visited both of them a number of times and sort of started to feel that, go back to the heart feeling of like, Michigan State may be a little bit big for me personally. And so I think I was set on Hope pretty early on in the process, probably somewhere in my junior year in 1997. I was thinking about maybe Hope as a home. My time at Hope, though, that's a lot easier for me to remember. I was overly involved, as many freshmen are. We have a couple of very fun traditions that were central to my freshman year. You've maybe heard of these, you maybe haven't with the folks you've been talking to, but we have one of the longest running traditions in the country is called the pull. Have you heard of this, Mark?
No, tell me about it.
It's a tug of war. I mean, it's going to sound a little bit nuts when you hear about it, but it's a tug of war. It used to be across the Black River, which is a river right in town here, it's not like a huge river, but and even year versus odd year. So the freshmen would be in this tug of war against the sophomores.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Started.
Sounds fun.
Over 100 years ago, and it's now culminated at the point where there are 18 pullers on either side.
Whoa.
And you're digging pits in the ground, and you're creating vests out of carpet samples and duct tape. It's 3 hours of training every day for 3 weeks.
Oh my
kind of
goodness.
Culminating.
So how do they pick the 18?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to be picked. Honestly, I'm not you can tell. You can see me. They won't be able to see me. I'm not a huge guy. I mean, I'm not like a big, strong, strapping guy. So, yeah, the first week was tryouts, and it was a lot of on the rope, like pulling against trees, and a
Gee.
lot of running and calisthenics and wall sits and the whole thing. And if you made it into that, into that prized 18 kids, it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate to be a part of that. My early on in my career at Hope, and then also another one called Nykirk, which is it's kind of it's a tradition in 3 parts. There's a play, an oration, a speech, a 6-minute speech, and then a song. And all this stuff you can find online. I mean, it's easier to see it on YouTube than for me to try to explain it. But again, it's freshmen versus sophomores. We have a lot of class pride at Hope. And so the freshmen are coached by the juniors, the sophomores are coached by the seniors. And it sort of brings this line through your time at Hope of involvement, in addition to all the other ways to be involved. So when I think back to those early years, it was tradition-based, in addition to the academics that I was involved in. So finding mentors, like I had mentors, Mark, from when my first and second year that stuck with me, who are still working at Hope now, who I grab coffee with, maybe not every month, but I would say every 6 weeks.
Wow.
And to have that longevity with professors that I didn't know I was going to connect with again after graduation is also a hallmark of Hope.
Nate, give us a feel for the size of the student body. Is it all undergrad? Is there a small grad program? What type of size is the student body? I think that would be helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so Hope is 3,200 students is kind of the primo spot we'd like to be in. So 800 a class. No, it's all undergrad. And so hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about research in the future, but in the podcast. But we have a lot of students choosing Hope for a variety of liberal arts options. But you figure 800 per freshman class, 3,200 total. That means we've got about 17 kids in a class. An 11-to-1 faculty to student to faculty ratio. But 17 kids in a class means on the front end, the good side, boy, you're going to be known. You're going to be known very well by your professors. On the bad side, like me, if you didn't study for a class or two and you got called on, boy, you feel like you're really standing out. And that was me on probably too many occasions.
Now, we've talked about Holland. I know downtown Holland's, a few blocks away. What can you tell us about Holland?
Yeah, Holland's great. Holland's a block from where I sit. Around the corner of 10th and College is where I sit, and 8th Street is 2 blocks away, as you said. But it really starts with Lomangelo's as one of the local coffee shops. We've got 3 or 4 coffee shops that you can imagine in a college community just being frequented at all hours of the day when they're open. I mean, the kids sitting, drinking a $7 latte, but staying for hours and studying and talking to friends. So downtown Holland, I would say the hallmarks of downtown Holland, we have heated streets, which is, most people are like, hold on, did you say heated streets? What do you mean by that? And
that's what I was thinking.
Exactly. There you go. So yeah, there's a local power plant that runs their hot water through the streets downtown. It's called Snowmelt. And so Holland is on the lakeshore, as we've discussed already. And we get a lot of lake effect snow coming off of Lake Michigan. So the winter for us we can get a foot of snow at a time, multiple times a winter. But downtown Holland on 8th Street, there is never snow. It is,
wow.
There's no, there's no plows running through there. It's dry. It's bone dry. And so because of that, we have students who are able to walk downtown. They can almost get from Hope College, they can get all the way downtown without getting their feet wet. And that allows for a lot of a big running culture and walking culture in downtown Holland, a very vibrant retail space when you don't have to fight for parking or, you got a bunch of snowbanks in the way. And so we've got a lot of eateries and coffee shops, as I mentioned. What I joke with families about when I'm meeting with them normally is, hey, you'll go broke trying to shop downtown at some of the places that are down there. But if you've got a job, you can drink some coffee and you can make that work.
Is it like a tourist destination?
It is it's such a tourist destination. I mean, in May, it's got to be the largest, I was going to say it's the largest Tulip Time festival in the country.
Wow.
And then my next statement was going to be like, and how many Tulip Time festivals are there in the country? It's probably not a long list. But yeah, we have a really strong community tie, like a town gown relationship, because we're so close. I mean, there's signs up in every business from, all the way down 8th Street and 9th Street saying, "Welcome back, Hope students." They got posters in the window, not just for shopping, but inquiring for, if you need a job, we'd love to hire you. So that's a nice benefit for our students as well.
I don't think I told you this in our pre-meeting, but I'm a graduate of Michigan State.
Oh,
So,
I did not know that.
Yeah. So,
go green, huh?
Yeah, go green, go white.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, my sister and brother-in-law are huge. They live in Ohio, in enemy country down there, in Columbus, and so they'll proudly fly the big S in the middle of the Buckeye State.
Well, when you get that sports stuff in your blood, it's kind of hard to get it out. I'll tell you that.
It's in there.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's great.
So, Nate, one of the most creative and exciting things you're doing at Hope is your transformational model of paying for college. Your president calls it Hope Forward. It's very exciting and very innovative. Tell our listeners what Hope Forward is and how it works.
Yeah, Hope Forward is super innovative. I mean, that's the best word. That's a word I would use as well. When I came back to Hope, when I went to Hope as a student, Mark, it felt expensive then. As I said, my older sister went to State and Michigan State, and to come back, 12 years later, and as an employee, and see how tuition had doubled in the time I'd been away, and I'm not that bright, I'll be honest with you. I'm just hanging in, and it was like, I can see that this is not working. This is an unsustainable business model. When President Scogin came back and started talking about a broken system, the broken business model of higher ed, it was like, this is really starting to track for so many families. And so Hope Forward was born. And this comes out of President Scogin's vision. And basically, in a nutshell, our goal is to have it's sort of a pay it forward model. And so our goal would be that generous donations would pay for our current students to come to school, to go through their 4 years, and for them to when they graduate, to try to also pay back and time, talent, and treasure other students having the same experience at Hope. And as you know from the higher ed space, Wellesley just hit, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but Wellesley just hit $100,000 sticker price.
Yeah.
And that's coming for a lot of schools. And that's happening when the confidence in higher education is dropping and dropping and dropping precipitously over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so those two things are at play with one another in a real way. And I think it's incumbent on higher ed institutions like Hope, who have a faith commitment, to think of things differently. Like, is there a better way that we can be looking at? And so our first cohort of Hope Forward students. So this is our fifth cohort will be coming in the fall. But our first cohort's actually graduating in a month. And I think we're all really excited to see where they go, what they've majored in, because a lot of students, you probably know this from your time, but because it's so expensive to go to a lot of schools, in some ways I believe it's become more transactional. Just the process of college has become a bit too transactional for me, where when I was a student, even though it was expensive, I didn't feel as if I had to study a certain thing in college to go get a certain job, to then make a bunch of money to pay off student debt. And I think that's becoming more real for families kind of in the process. So Hope Forward hits right at the base of that. That's kind of step one, is the access piece. How do we make it more affordable for students to find their calling? And then there's, as a part of their experience when they're at Hope, we have a really robust advising group. So that group is together. Those Hope Forward cohorts are together all the time, learning about not just access, but also community and generosity. Because I don't mean to monologue. I know it's a podcast, but I get excited about this one because generosity is sorely lacking right now. And when you think of a higher ed business model that just keeps going up and up and up, the national average is 5% a year for tuition. That is unsustainable. And there's little generosity to be left when you're paying so much out. So much is going out the door for families. How can we be generous?
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Nate Haveman, VP of Enrollment at Hope College. We hope you join us next week for the next segment.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, Kevin approached me about some updates in international universities that were time sensitive, and I wanted to air this. It'll be a two-parter. You'll now hear part 1 of 2. Kevin Newton, what's up, my friend?
Mark, good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah, and we'll be seeing each other soon in person. Kevin and I are going to go grab some good Dallas eats on April 12th on my trip. I'm excited.
I can't wait. You know, the hard part's going to be getting it down to one restaurant. But if we have to do a little tasting tour, you know, our wives won't mind too much.
Hey, I'm single for 3 weeks, so I'm good. So, listen, Kevin reached out. Well, we've been talking back and forth, but a lot of new developments happening in international schools. A lot of new opportunities, things that Kev will tell you are happening for the first time. Something as recently as this morning you got an email on. Major change. Kev, take it where you want to go.
So, yeah, there have been a lot of, shall we say, interesting developments. And I think no need to bury the lead. I literally, half an hour ago, I got an email from the new acting co-director of admissions at St. Andrews announcing a change to the way that they're doing admissions. And typically, if you go to St. Andrews' website, it will say international applications are open until June 30th, which is the UCAS cutoff. But it's been really popular wisdom that you don't apply after the UCAS deadline of equal consideration unless you're interested in something like chemistry or geology or modern languages or English that just don't get a lot of traction.
Kev, tell our listeners what that deadline typically is, because they won't know that.
Oh, typically it's the end of January. This year it was the 29th. I think next year it's going to be the 31st. It's always sometime in the end of January for UCAS. But it's the less popular degrees that are still typically open. And, you know, with St. Andrews, as well as with the other ancient Scottish universities, you can kind of maneuver your way into what you actually want to study. Up to a third of St. Andrews students change their course of study during their time there. So it's very, very popular to do. But I just received an email from the acting co-director of admissions saying, you know, because I wanted to confirm that there's a number of my applicants this year have been told, hey, we're from St. Andrews, we're running behind on admissions. We have too many applicants and we're having to kind of sort through everyone. This is a new thing for them. And St. Andrews, you know, it's already one of the most popular universities for American students. 20% of the student body is American. And honestly, this caught me in a complete surprise that they are making spaces, even in their most popular degree fields, for Americans applying later. So if you're, you know, let's say that Ivy Day or whenever comes around and you're thinking, you know, you didn't get the offer you wanted or whatever reason, throw your hat in for St. Andrews. There are worse ideas. And this is really just...
And I would reverse it. I would say, if you have interest, apply now. Applying is not committing to go. It's
right.
Like one of my mentors, right? You don't have to wait until Ivy Day to make that decision.
You know, it is a pretty straightforward application. You know, there are... we can talk about that later, or, you know, some other time. But it's also just a theme that I'm seeing more and more for, shall we just give it the very broad term of reasons, that a lot of international universities are really trying to make space for Americans who may be looking for someplace to spend the next 3 or 4 years. Or even, and I know we don't really talk about this that much here, but a lot of universities are looking at the recent cuts in funding for graduate programs and thinking this is their chance to really secure some top-tier talent. Yeah. So what we're seeing is a real increase in opportunities. I was talking to some of my colleagues who work in oceanic admissions. They're trying to broaden access for Americans. It's, you know, again, without drifting into certain subjects, it's really, if you're looking for to start somewhere new in August or September or sometime like that, and you happen to be a university student, you've still got time. The only places I can think of that right now are not still accepting applicants, you know, I wouldn't do it in a Dutch university because the housing, you're just going to pay an arm and a leg for housing at this point, if you can find it. But certain Canadian universities, and then the old standbys of Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, and Imperial. And I'm going to confirm with my Imperial colleague next week that they may still have some spots open. It's a
Let me ask
wild
you this,
time.
because this is my question. For highly selective schools, they're not needing to do this to quote unquote meet their number and meet their budget. Are they expanding their class size and going to bring in a bigger class, or are they just looking at it like maybe we can upgrade our talent and we're not going to change our class size, but why would we walk away from some top tier talent that might want to look at us now? What do you see going on there, or do you think it's a different answer for different schools?
I think, to give a pretty big generalization, it's a little bit of both, but definitely more the latter, is that they see this as an opportunity. They've been looking, and a conversation that I continually have with admissions representatives and others who work on the other side of the desk, as it were, is that they really want to increase their visibility. They really think that, for the right student, and again, not every student should consider going abroad. It's not, and not every country is perfect for every student. There's a reason we talk a lot about fit. And,
Sure.
just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a student, and, they were saying how interested they were in one university. And they had, shall we say, a rather unique demographic background. And I had to break it to them that, given how you identify, given these facts about you, you may not be comfortable there. You've more than got the grades. You've more than got the test
Sure.
scores. It's just, you may not find your people there. But I think that what they're looking at is this is a chance to really internationalize their undergraduate classes. And especially for those top universities, the top 100, 200 universities around the world, American students have always been kind of a get, for lack of a better term, because I can speak from experience. I've been doing this for about a decade, and
Right.
it's a rapidly growing field. And even before certain external events that increased that motivation, it was still growing. And it's driven by a lot of things, that we've talked about before that we don't have to get into today. But they're looking at this. I know some places are even increasing their merit aid offerings because they recognize that, if they offer someone a £2,000 or £3,000 merit scholarship a year, that might drop it down to being competitive with what they're paying in state.
Yeah, that sounds like what internally happens over in this country, where you constantly have the private schools trying to see if they could compete with the public schools through merit scholarships, especially the the moderately selective to less selective ones. Even some vary, but not usually extremely selective will do that game. So what would you say, Kev, is the increase in U.S. applicants that these schools are seeing? Like, do you think it's going to be more than 10% if they were to compare year over year?
I think where it really gets into, and where, if you do a little bit of work on the back end, you've got some real potential to stand out, is that right now it's the big names that are seeing this. St. Andrews, Edinburgh, Oxford, Cambridge, they're seeing a huge increase in demand. Those are 4 universities out of the 130, 140 some odd universities in the UK. They're,
right.
For the other side of the world, University of Melbourne has seen an increase. University of Sydney, Australian National University, that's 3 out of the 40 or so universities that are between Australia and New Zealand.
London School of Economics?
I think they're seeing a bit of an increase as well. Admittedly, it's those places that people have heard of. And it's, you were just making the point about moderately selective and even very selective institutions. I'm working with someone right now who actually we had dinner a couple months ago, and this individual, he's a very proud parent, and rightfully so. I don't know which he was more proud of, the fact that his child had been offered an interview at an Oxbridge institution, or the fact that they'd been offered a scholarship at a top, 20 UK university besides. So it's admittedly, I'm even seeing the words full tuition thrown around.
Wow.
So
You're talking about full tuition is in full tuition merit?
Full tuition merit, and this is something
Wow.
that 3 or 4 years ago was simply unheard of, because
Sure.
the idea was, it's very similar. I will try to keep my past experiences of my personal life out of this, but going to a public university out of state, you know that you're to some degree you're subsidizing. And
Sure.
this is something that we've really seen. It's not the kind of thing that, ethically speaking, I would not tell anyone, oh, just apply overseas, you're going to get a merit scholarship,
Right.
But it is, the way I'm seeing it is really the cherry on top, that if you're willing to look at a few other places that maybe aren't the Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, St. Andrews, Imperial, LSE, that particular set of places that are very well known here in the US, and look at places that have amazing global reputations and still good reputations in the US. It's just, when you say Durham in the context of higher education, you think of the home of Duke University. You don't necessarily think of Durham University in the UK. And
Sure.
if you're in the UK, you think of Durham as being the kind of number 3 spot in some cases to Oxford and Cambridge. With respect to my friends at St. Andrews, Edinburgh, everywhere else that would claim that number 3 spot.
What about Canada? Do you see an increase in Canada as well, or not? What are your?
I'm seeing a little bit of an increase.
I know that's
in
one
Canada.
place where we both overlap. Like I do some Canada, you do some Canada.
Right.
Both of us. What are you seeing there?
Honestly,
Anything?
I can't really speak intelligently about Canada, because most of my students, who are looking at this are wanting to go a bit further away.
Sure.
I've had a few Canadian applicants. They've done pretty well. And,
Right.
But the Canadian...
But none of your people think of you more as further away.
Right.
Most of the time they
And
seek you out. I get it.
Admittedly, unless you're an American citizen, or unless you're a Canadian citizen, the benefits of going to Canada versus benefits of going to Australia or the UK, it's still typically 4 years instead of 3. It's admittedly,
Sure.
There are pros and cons to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is something I should know, and I cannot believe it. I don't know this. I'm embarrassed. Do you do grad school admissions at all? Is that part of what you do?
Absolutely.
I thought you probably did, just because of what you said a second ago. I'm so locked into that undergrad world, so I oftentimes ask you that. So, what's going on here, cuts in NIH, people dropping programs. I don't know if you saw University of Pennsylvania literally rescinded acceptances they'd already made because they were going to be, reducing programs. And then on this end, you have people who are like, well, why would I go get a PhD to go in to do research in something that might cost me a lot of money and isn't guaranteed to make a lot of money? Like, now the risk proposition just seems so much greater, because I don't even know if there will be a job for me at the other end. Are you seeing the interest more on the grad school side, undergrad, both? Tell me about that.
Really on both. And,
Mhm.
something that's in the past, I've said, for grad school, that if you receive funding to do a PhD, it's hard to argue with. And it's a bit of a process to get funding overseas. Typically, what you have to do is you have to already have a master's degree. It's a taught master's degree. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, you have to do your degree with honors, which is an extra year of work. These are really broad generalizations, but you have to prove that you're, pushing the limits so that you could just jump into a research-only program. And then there are groups like in the UK, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, that do provide funding even for overseas students. What I've seen a real increase in are, because you've got to time those just right. And something that I just, spreading, from the mountaintop, as it were, is I think it's really cool how the Netherlands does graduate admissions, or especially for research positions for PhDs. And normally, I say the Netherlands has a lot going for it, but take it with a grain of salt. There have been some changes in how they want to go forward with their English taught undergraduate programs. And, there's a political movement in the Netherlands that is similar to certain political movements here in the US. So it's just, it's not all sunshine and roses, but you essentially look for a PhD program in the Netherlands like you would look for a job here. You see the PhD that's being offered. They tell you what the research is going to be in. You apply. And I think the brilliant part is some of these stipends are up to €4,000 a month I remember from my graduate school days, €4,000 a month would have been pretty darn nice. I know that friends of mine who have had graduate stipends here in the US, that's a bit healthier than what they're working with. So, especially, if you're in a STEM field and you're in a position or somebody, if you're bummed out, to put it very mildly, about the state of STEM PhDs with the recent funding cuts, look at the Netherlands. It's going to be competition, certainly, but there are some great options there. And honestly, you're going to get a better stipend, and you're going to have a research environment that's, again, I want to thread the needle carefully here to be as respectful as possible, but that is, open to what you're actually doing.
It's nice to know those stipends extend to Americans. Yeah. Friends, this concludes the first part of my conversation with Kevin Newton on changes happening in international admissions. Hope you join us next week for the final part. Friends, I am currently in Sherman, Texas, and I'm about to visit Austin College in 1 hour. After that, I head home. So on Monday's episode, I'm going to do something that I did after my California trip that you told me you enjoyed. I'm going to give you kind of awards in different categories for the schools that I visited. And friends, we've been banging out the college spotlights lately a lot. I recorded a bunch before I left on my trip, and I recorded a few from hotels on this trip, actually. So we're going to give you a brand new spotlight on Monday. It's with John Pollard. He's the Dean of Franke Honors College at the University of Arizona. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. And I believe that with every fiber of my being. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.com website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.